Hi everyone, we are back for part 2 of Acts 27, and when we left off we had this terrible storm going on and this little ship, really little ship, being tossed about by the winds and the waves, and everyone on board is losing hope. They don't think they're going to make it through this storm. So let's look at verses 18 and 19. I'll be reading this in the English Standard Version. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Now, what does it mean that they jettisoned the cargo? Well, going back to our picture here, you can see that the cargo is underneath the ship, and this we talked about was only 6 feet deep. But this is where they kept the cargo because they had to keep the men on board. And so it means that they got rid of the cargo. And what is the ship's tackle? Well, it would be all the pulleys and all the instruments and things like that, anchors, and they're just trying to get rid of as much as they can. And why would they do this? Well, because if they can lighten their load, then then the risk of sinking is less. All right. And verse 20 tells us that they have not seen clear skies at all during this whole time, ever since this nor'easter came in, and the storm is still raging. The wind and the waves is tossing this ship about, and they're all losing hope, all except for Paul. That's right. Why? Because he had a word from the Lord. And as I said earlier, when you receive a word from the Lord, you hang on to that word until you see it come to pass, because it will influence all the decisions that you make in your life. If you don't hang on to that word, you'll be tossed by the winds and the waves also. But if you hang on to that word, you know that you are going to receive that word if you just hang on to it, and you'll be able to make better decisions. Now, verses 21 through 26, hope restored. So Paul takes charge, reminds them that you should have heeded my warning before when we were in that harbor, but please listen to my instructions now. Don't be depressed. Have hope. No lives will be lost. Only the ship will be lost. He did tell them that, but we have to what? We have to stick together. If we don't stick together, then all bets are off, because that's what God said. We have to stick together. So then in verses 27 through 29, it tells us that they're on their 14th night. No food, no water, probably, maybe some water, I don't know, little sleep, being tossed by the winds and the waves, probably not feeling well. You know, if you've ever been on board when it's out to sea and there's a storm, it's not pretty. And then about midnight, and where have we heard that before? The Philippian jail, that's right. About midnight, the sailors sense that they are approaching land, and so they are going to take some soundings. Now, how could they tell that they were approaching land? Well, you can smell it. The air smells different. You can smell trees, you can smell dirt, you can smell the land, and it smells a lot different than the salt water. I used to live on Long Island. That was one of the places I lived and grew up there. And when I would go home and visit my family, my parents, and I would land in LaGuardia Airport, I would get off and I could smell the salt air, because now I was living somewhere else, inland, 8 hours inland, and I couldn't smell the salt air from where I was. And I'm sure that the flip is true as well. If you are out to sea and you are smelling that salt air constantly, then all of a sudden you say, hey, that smells like land. That smells like trees. That smells like dirt. And they were happy sailors. And so they take a sounding. Now, what does it mean, a sounding? What is a sounding? Well, it happens to be, if I stretch out my arms, you stretch out your arms, and from fingertip to fingertip with our arms stretched out is approximately 6 feet. All right. And that's what they called a fathom. And they took soundings of how many fathoms were between the top of the ocean and the dirt of the ocean, the floor of the ocean. And so the first sounding is 120 feet, and the next sounding is 90 feet. And so they know that they're getting closer to the shore. Now, some of your translations may call it 20 fathoms and 15 fathoms, but if you multiply by 6, that's what we come up with. Now, so they decide to drop all 4 anchors. Why? Because they don't want to dash themselves against the rocks and split everything all apart, and they don't know where they are and so forth. And they decide to do this and wait until morning. So they drop all their anchors and they decide to stay where they are until morning so they can see where they are exactly. So verses 30 through 32 in the New Living Translation, Paul takes his authority with boldness. Listen to this. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ships. Did you hear that? The sailors tried to abandon the ship, not the prisoners, the sailors. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the stern or front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer, this would be Julius, and the soldiers, "You will die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. Now they're listening to Paul, right? Verses 33 through 35 in the New Living Translation says, "Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks. 2 weeks they haven't eaten. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your heads will perish." Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Verses 36 through 39, Dr. Luke tells us that they all became more cheerful and were encouraged and took food for themselves. All told, there were 276 souls on the ship, on a ship this size. Can you imagine? Or a ship this size, 276 people. They were crowded. After they had all eaten sufficiently, they proceeded to lighten the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day and they all saw land, they did not recognize it, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which, taking counsel, they purposed to run the ship ashore if they possibly could. So what they're going to do is, this is the front of the ship, and they see the beach and they want to beach the ship, okay, which is a lot safer than running into the rock. So they want to ram it into the sand and let it be fast there, and then they can jump out and get to shore. Now let's look at verses 40 and 41 in the Passion Translation. They cut away the anchors, leaving them in the sea, untied the ropes holding the rudders, and hoisted the foresail to the breeze to head for the beach. But they drifted into the rocky shoals between 2 depths of the sea, causing the ship to flounder still a distance from shore. The bow or front was stuck fast, jammed onto the rocks, while the stern or aft back was being smashed by the pounding of the surf. So the front did get stuck, but it got stuck in the rocks. And the back of the boat is just, going every which way while the front is stuck. Well, what happens? What's the prophecy? The ship starts to break apart. It can't handle all that. So let's look at verses 42 through 44. This is how they got ashore and survived. The soldiers wanted to kill all the prisoners to prevent them from escaping. But the Roman officer, which would be Julius, was determined to bring Paul safely through. So he foiled their attempts. He commanded the prisoners and crew who could swim to jump overboard and swim ashore. The rest all managed to survive by clinging to planks and broken pieces of the ship, so that everyone scrambled to the shore uninjured. Prophecy fulfilled. Whew, we got through that storm. I'm so grateful. I hope you all aren't seasick, and I hope that you will be back for the last chapter in the book of Acts, which is going to be chapter 28, Paul on the island of Malta. So we find out that this island that they're on actually has a name, and it's called Malta. That's Malta. If you want to read ahead, I would appreciate that. And then you'll be able to know what's coming up next. It's an exciting chapter. All right, until then, This has been Eileen on Jesus. I thank you for joining me today, and we'll see you the next time. Bye-bye for now.